Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a real historical investigation, looking at one of the most transformative figures in all of human history. We're calling this the Galilean Catalyst. Right, let's just jump straight into the heart of the puzzle. This is the question that frames our entire investigation. I mean, think about it. How does this even happen? It's a paradox of power that historians have grappled with for centuries.
So, to even begin to answer that, we have to set the scene. Our investigation is all about a man named Jesus of Nazareth. But to really understand his story, you first have to understand the world he was born into, specifically the intense social and political pressures of Roman-occupied Judea.
Okay, so we're not starting in the marble halls of Rome, not even close. This story kicks off in a small town, Bethlehem, in a province basically under the boot of the Roman Empire. And, this context is everything. For your average person back then, this meant living in a pretty rigid, often brutal world, where your fate was pretty much decided by an emperor you'd never meet. Now, what's so fascinating here is what we're not seeing. This is like a profile of complete powerlessness in the traditional sense. He had no money to buy followers, no army to command them, and absolutely no official title to give him any authority. His early life in Nazareth is described as a quiet beginning. I mean, he was completely off the radar of the empire's elite. So, if he didn't have any of the usual tools of power, where did all this influence come from? Well, that brings us right to our next section. We're going to look at the message itself, and maybe more importantly, the social soil where that message landed. To really get the power of his message, you have to understand who was listening. For a lot of people in first century Judea, life under Roman rule meant crushing taxes and just this constant economic anxiety. It was an environment where so many people felt they just didn't have a voice. Honestly, for most folks, staying silent was the best way to survive. And this slide just lays out the contrast perfectly. Around the age of 30, he starts speaking, and what he's saying is a direct challenge to the system. Where the Roman system ran on fear. He talked about truth. Where people saw corruption, he called for justice. And in a world of forced silence, he spoke of mercy. It was radical. So, who's listening? It's not the powerful. It's not the elite. His followers were the everyday people of the area. Fishermen, laborers, the poor. These were the exact groups who were most disconnected from power and felt the weight of the Roman system the most. And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. This wasn't a political campaign. It wasn't a military uprising. The goal wasn't to take over the existing power structure. No, the goal was way more radical. It was to completely change how people saw the world, their own value, and their relationship to power itself. Now, you can't spark that kind of radical shift in thinking and not expect some pushback. And that leads us to our third section, the inevitable conflict. When an idea comes along that challenges the status quo, the systems built on that old way of thinking, well, they start to feel pretty threatened. This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? An idea can be way more dangerous to an empire than an army because you can't just fight it with swords. The pushback was pretty much guaranteed. And the threat was coming from two sides. First, you had the local religious leaders who felt like their authority was being seriously undermined. Then you had the Roman authorities who were always on the lookout for any trouble in the provinces, and these started to see a real threat to their control. A teacher with a message is one thing. A message that's becoming a movement, that's something else entirely. And look how quickly this all escalates. It goes from a quiet life to a message that starts catching on, to the system getting nervous. It all comes to a head with his betrayal, his arrest, and a trial that, let's be honest, was less about justice and more about shutting down a threat. The final decision came down from the Roman governor himself, Pontius Pilate. The sentence was crucifixion, a brutal public execution designed not just to kill someone, but to make a terrifying example of them. This was meant to be the end, the full stop, the end of the man and his movement. But, of course, as history tells us, it wasn't the end. And this is where the story takes its most incredible turn. This brings us to our final section, the unbelievable, paradoxical aftermath. Let's just pause on this for a second. 0. This number is such a stark reminder of the puzzle we started with. No army, no political organization. The influence we're about to see explode across the globe was launched without any of the tools we normally associate with power. And here it is, the great historical irony. The very thing designed to snuff out his message, that public execution, became the catalyst that made it explode. His death wasn't an ending. It was, in a strange way, a beginning. His ideas didn't spread through military conquest or by a king's decree. They spread organically, from one person to another. They jumped over cultural and geographical lines, passed down from one generation to the next. What began in a forgotten corner of the Roman Empire grew into one of the most significant forces in shaping history. The impact, it's just, by any historical measure, unmatched.
So we end up right back where we started, with a question. If you look at this purely as a historical event, setting aside all the theology for a moment, what does this unbelievable story tell us about how power really works? What does it show us about the strength of a powerful idea when it goes up against the raw might of an empire? That's definitely something worth thinking about.